The drum brakes are drum braking. Never mind the fact that we've got e-brake parts in here that don't actually work. That'll be a future problem. Manual adjustment conversion. We just take an old top spring and then bend it and put it in this way so it hits the wheel. Also new wheel studs. Brake drum? Sure. Well, we've learned two things. One, those marking pens are really good at marking and not so good at coming off. Two, it's kind of terrible, but I don't know. I like the look of it anyway. Well, the good news is you can't see both sides at once. Yikes. Okay, we'll just leave that alone. Anyway, test cut. Well, it cuts because race car. Oh, yeah. Super solid metal there, buddy. We'll just save this in case we ever want to go back. We'll weld this chunk of rust and Bondo right back in there.
I smell Bondo.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, a little bit of grinding in there maybe. Yeah, you know, I mean, it's something. Race car. It's going to be fine. And the biggest bummer is the scratch the jigsaw put in it.
Yeah, we should put a piece of tape on it.
It's a little late now. Over here on the driver's side, Allan hit this spot in the middle that would not cut right. It was just like bouncing the blade around. We figured out what happened with that. You know, we didn't need taillights that bad. I didn't see the wires when I looked from the back side, but what I did see was that this wheel lip has already been welded in out of another car. So that's why we've got 1, 2, 3 layers of steel here, and also a 1/4 inch of Bondo, or more. You could always tell from far away that there was like a whoopty in this quarter, and I kind of thought it was because this thing was wrecked. Nope, it's because it was stitched together out of multiple cars and coated in Bondo decades ago. Or, you know, both. Yep, we're getting down to race weight now. Okay, sure, we cut the wire, but we didn't put it in there. This is just amazing. Oh, that's pretty cool too. And somebody ordered the wrong lug nuts. The shanks are way too long. You ready for your big reveal? We've got it on the ground and it has a bumper. It's awesome. I hope you're sitting down. Look at all of that beef. I'd really like the back of this thing down a couple inches. Anyway, I'm Jamie. This is Dead Dodge Garage. And now we've got a race car. I basically rehashed the entire plan for this car in the last video. I don't know when you're going to see this one, so it was either a week ago or 2 weeks ago or 6 months ago. But anyway, you can refer back to that if you're curious, or check out the playlist on my channel for the Garbage Can Cuda, which is this. Now that we've got the rear tires on the ground and looking fantastic, we're moving right along to the front end. Allan's got this entire suspension drooped out because we have small ball joint upper arms to swap to. These are the late big ball joint ones. And fully overhauled 10-inch front brakes. They're on spindles. They're totally ready to go. So we're going to take this cobwebby junk off and throw those on. Apparently I got the tie rod and the ball joint good and tight. Allan's wailing on these things and they are not letting go. I installed these drum brake spindles that I got from Tom with Rocket Restorations to replace the disc brakes I took off of this car. I took them off because I wanted to go back to the old school period drums. You get less rolling resistance and they weigh a little bit less than the disc brakes. I also wanted to swap the dual pop master cylinder for a factory type single, so that my headers fit right. I actually traded those disc brakes for like an entire duster. Anyway, we might have to get nasty with these things. It finally came apart. Sure wasn't easy. There were so many bad words happening over here.
No.
Also, Allan says these are heavy. Oh God. You know, I knew this thing needed bushings, but the driver's side lower control arm bushing is like no longer in there at all. Yeah, okay. So I guess we're doing lower control arm bushings. I swear I had some polyurethane lower bushings. I don't see those. I do have some stock type rubber ones. So maybe we're using stock type rubber. The adjustment in the control arm is loose. I just found a hole torched in the frame I didn't want to know about. Anyway, now it's party time. Ow. Yeah. Nailed it. Strut rod nut is off. Kind of made some noise. Didn't know we were doing a suspension build on this car. Oh God. Yeah, so What do you think of that?
Tight, very tight.
Yeah.
Another 6 years or so.
I think you're right. You know, I remember when Zach had this car, watching him like barrel around a corner and this whole wheel going at this crazy angle. I think we know why now. Allan noticed something else interesting. The K-member is cracked here. So now we're doing an unexpected lower control arm bushing job. Because we're going to use a factory rubber bushing, only because it's what I have on hand, the shell has to be removed from inside the lower control arm socket thingy here. So Allan cut it with the Sawzall, carefully, a couple times, and then chewed the crap out of it with a hammer and a chisel, getting it out of there. Now we can press the new one into the socket, and then we'll press the pin into that. Maybe we'll clean that up a little bit. If you do the polyurethane style bushing, which I usually do, you leave the shell in place and the new bushing actually goes inside of that. As you saw in this one, the rubber was like not even in there anymore. If the rubber is somehow still attached to it, well, sometimes you got to set the rubber on fire, which is always fun. Digging through my front end parts stash, I found one pro-forged lower control arm pin and polyurethane bushing, but I don't really want poly on one side and rubber on the other. Pressing new bushing home, carefully. Sketch level. Now we press the pin in. We're doing this with the socket against the inner sleeve thing, so that doesn't get pressed through the rubber as we attempt this. Done.
So tight.
Beautiful. So we're fixing the K-frame, and the ideal thing here would be to weld this on the back side. If we weld it in here, we're gonna have to grind all of that smooth because of where the bushing sits. But if we go out here on the outside of the washer, I think we'll be golden. Yep. It's welded. Need to clean up a few little spots on this side where this bushing's gonna sit, and then we're good to go. I don't know whose bright idea it was to spray paint semi-flat black over rust on here. Oh wait, yes I do. Anyway, maybe we'll kind of sort of try to fix that a little. Allan says these ones are lighter.
Way lighter.
Nice. Those are stock front brakes from a 68 Dart? I don't remember. The others were the late style ones. Anyway, this is back together, and we're now putting on our fresh-ish donor spindles and ball joints and upper arms and all that stuff. We've got our snazzy driver side spindle and brake hanging in here. Don't have the torsion bar back in yet. We'll get there. Anyway, this needs to be torqued and pinned. That's fine. We can't final assemble the upper because we don't have boots. Apparently, whoever took these apart totally destroyed them, so we got to get new ones. It's a while later, and Allan has gone home for the evening, but first he did get the other spindle hanging on here as well. So we've got two shiny new 10-inch brakes. Again, we're installing these because they already have brand new components. Hoses, wheel cylinders, shoes, even the hardware looks pretty decent. And the drums seem to be in pretty good shape too. So this was just the quickest and cheapest and easiest way to get brakes on here happening. Notice the upper bump stops or droop stops have gone missing. They were kind of sort of destroyed anyway, but they were still doing something. Now our arm can droop out that little bit more, allowing the entire suspension to drop down, aiding in weight transfer. Anyway, we'll get those rubber boots and get back to this tomorrow. It's a new day. I'm driving a Scamp, and we're working on the Barracuda again. I still just cannot get over how glorious this thing looks. And today, we're absolutely going to see it on the ground on all four wheels again. Obviously, we're not going to have engine weight. There are a bunch of other things to do, but at least we'll see it on the ground on our four shiny new MT tires and these sweet centerline wheels. We've got the whole front end hovering on a sketchy jack that's falling off the thing, and anyway, nobody breathe. Look at this. We've got one entire suspension. Now we just need a second suspension, and we need to torque some things and do an alignment, and the list goes on. One of the next things that needs to happen is we're going to convert these from self-adjusting brakes to manually adjusting brakes. That way we can set them loose for minimum rolling resistance. If we leave the self-adjusters in there, well, they'll self-adjust themselves, and we don't want that. Okay, funny story. Allan got into this drum, and someone already deleted the self-adjuster parts. The cable's just broken off. The little arm piece is gone. The spring that should go to it is gone. What we don't have is a piece to lock this adjuster and keep it from spinning. So we'll add a cross spring just like we did on the back, and we'll be good to go there. Essentially what we're doing here is mimicking the heavy duty, non-self-adjusting 11-inch brakes that were used on Roadrunners and Charger RTs in 68 and 69, I think. Allan's got an old top cross spring on here now. This is what's gonna lock our star wheel and keep this thing from adjusting itself. For a regular road going application, you want to adjust your shoes so they are just touching. That way, when you hit the pedal, you've got the best feeling brakes and the most effective shoe. In this case, we're going to adjust them so that they're just not touching so we get zero rolling resistance. This will require a little bit more brake pedal travel, and because of the angle of the shoe, there actually will be a little less braking, but, you know, race car. With this front left brake adjusted up and everything back together, I can now install one of our front runners. These wheels came without center caps, and I was going to run them that way, but the beat grease cap look, I'm not a big fan of that. So I did put the center cap on there. It's kind of too shiny. I bought these 7/16 lug nuts off of Summit. They have open ends, so you can see where your stud is at. These are 4 Krager SST wheels. This length is perfect for the front, but the back, for whatever reason, needs one that's like that tall at the shank. I might be cutting the other ones, or we'll just use the crappy used ones. Well, never mind. These get in the way of the big washers, so forget that level of vanity. We'll be seeing this. I could have dug up smaller washers, but I can't be bothered. Anyway, that's looking good. I don't see it wobbling around horribly, so it must have standard on those pretty well. There's occasionally a little tick-tick noise in here. I need to pull this off and see if it's just a cotter pin dancing around or something. Well, look at that. It's on the ground on all 4 wheels. Of course, the ride height is nowhere near. Currently, it's fully drooped. We don't have any engine or transmission weight, so there's nothing to bring the nose down. I do want a nose-high stance on this car, but we need some kind of suspension travel, so it's definitely not going to be this high. Currently, it's sitting pretty level. I don't think nose-high stance is actually going to happen, at least not with those super stock springs. Those things are serious business. I believe everything in the front end, as far as mechanical parts, is actually done. Going up. Slowly. It's a little bit later, and stuff is happening. Allan's got the brakes plumbed in the back here. Now we're working on the front. He's currently making the cross piece that goes from the splitter block on the driver's side over to the passenger side. This thing, because it had a disc brake conversion and a goofy master cylinder and a prop valve up in the engine compartment, had totally goofy lines. I threw all of those away forever ago. So we're basically just putting it back to stock, but we have to make all of the steel. Well, and when I say steel, it's actually the fancy copper nickel, whatever it is. It's nice stuff. When we converted Dave's 65 Barracuda to a dual pot master cylinder, we added the safety valve thingy onto that, and we got this dumb splitter valve out of his car. So we're putting it in our car and making ours factory. Is this flare YouTube certified? I think so. Now I'm on another mission. I'd really like to get the transmission fitted so we know where things need to be. For one thing, the drive shaft loop. It's going to have to be bent to match this floor, but I need to know where it ends up relative to the transmission. The transmission needs to be in place to do that. Also, we need to know if the scatter shield is going to fit in the car at all. I have a feeling we might be doing some clearancing in the tunnel area. But to find that out, we need the 4-speed in place. Okay, no problem. Or so I thought. In a previous video, I built this slick shift transmission. I used this aluminum main case, which had previously been set up as a Hemi transmission, which totally exploded into little pieces. And I used this awesome A-body aluminum output housing, or tail shaft housing. It's an aftermarket piece, which you can tell by the shape and the fact that there is no speedometer drive. Now, I didn't have to use this, but it was there, and it's aluminum, and that seemed pretty trick. Also, it's an A-body part, the shifter's in the right place, it's the right length for a factory driveline, and so I thought that would be great. While this is definitely an A-body piece, it turns out it wasn't intended to fit in early A-bodies. It's way too tall. Take a look at this factory housing. Look how short it is above the transmission mount there. It's like, well, I don't know, 3 inches, I guess. Now look at this one. It's at least an extra ½ inch, if not more. You can see this thing is like swollen in that area. I don't know why they put a bunch of extra beef in that location behind the vent, but they did. And that section is right in the way of the cross member in this car. With the transmission butted up into here, I was like a ½ inch away from being able to bolt these. There was a factory rubber pad, which I've already removed, but it didn't help that much. So what I'm gonna have to do is grind the crap out of these edges here and maybe even some up on the top. This is ridiculous. Very silly for a part that I didn't even need to use and wouldn't have if I knew this was gonna be a problem, but here we are. Apparently, you're not supposed to grind aluminum with these grinder wheels intended for like ferrous materials. Something about jamming them full of aluminum and then they explode. I don't know, it's never stopped me before.
There's just nothing quite like grinding on rare, irreplaceable speed parts, is there?
What a horrible, sparkly mess. We're probably not even done. Maybe not halfway done. I probably should have covered the vent, but I think it's fine. Let's say it's fine. Hey look, the transmission's dangling in it again. No, it doesn't fit yet, but we're getting closer. Anyway, look at all this brake line stuff. This line was on the car as an extension from the splitter prop valve thing that was up here down to the original rear brake line. We're gonna use that as a master cylinder line, so it's connected to the splitter down here, but Allan does need to bend it a little bit. Here's our new line going across to the right front. I think the left front's already done. Here's the front left, very nice. Now our fender well header, of course, is gonna come kinda right through here, but that should be good where it's at. I don't really mind grinding the crap out of things to make them fit. I do wish I knew why they added all this extra beef and how much of it there is, but yeah, we'll either find out the hard way or this will actually work. Okay, I am gonna grind on that some more, but I grabbed the torch. I'm gonna heat these spots and then beat them with a hammer and ruin everything here, and hopefully I won't have to grind off quite as much. Burn the car to the ground. Whee! I could just make them holes, but I don't really want to do that. Well, it's better. Hopefully I didn't deform this thing, which allegedly had been cut on both sides to the point that we can no longer bolt a cross member in here. But we'll see in a minute. Dude, the chunks falling out of this car while I was beating on it. And a lot of those are in my hair. Okay, it finally fits. Torching, 3 rounds of grinding. Now we're still hanging on 2 smaller bolts. It needs to like cinch up a little bit for the bigger bolts, but it looks like it will. And I don't even think it's going to be vibrating on the floor. So that's the good news. Of course, this thing's going to have solid motor mounts and it's got a pretty solid poly mount back here. So, well, there are going to be some horrible rattles and vibrations no matter what, but we do want it to not hit the cross member. I think we're good. It's starting to get real. The transmission and the scatter shield are in. Not permanently, obviously. I don't know if you could tell, but the angle we're at is not at all right. That thing's definitely going to have to angle up a little bit more, and it's currently on the pinch weld here between the firewall and the floor. So we'll drop it down again, we'll beat that savagely with a hammer, and then we've got to make more room for linkage on the other side. See, it's kind of funny, this car had a 4-speed overdrive before, so they didn't have to clearance this part of the floor for the 3/4 lever. On the 1-to-1 transmission, it faces up, so now it's hitting, and I got to fix that. On the overdrives, because it faces down, this never would have been a problem. I think I've made it quite apparent that I'll cut or beat any part of this car to make this build work. Some of you guys over there in the Midwest might be thinking this thing's super solid and minty, and compared to what you can get your hands on, yeah, but it's certainly not a nice car. Another round of obnoxiously loud hammering later, we're here. I think this has to be really close, just looking at where the bolt heads are going to be. We've got a bit of an uphill angle on the input shaft there, so yeah, this should be pretty good. Now, to put the engine in, we're not going to be able to lift this higher than it's supposed to be, which can help, you know, get past engine mounts and stuff. So that may be a bit of a problem, but overall, I'm pleased. This is big progress. The transmission's like in here with us. I was a little worried about the linkage because I built this on the transmission out of the car, but it looks like it's going to work. Of course, I did have to pull the shifter off to get the thing in here and to get the linkage around the cross member there. This is how the factory linkage is, of course. It sits right here above the floor, under the hump. I do still need to come up with a reverse setup. That rod will go down under the cross member and then up to the lever there. We'll deal with that someday. Allan couldn't tolerate the horribly hideous, slightly kinked line that was on here on the rear left, so we built this new one. Our master cylinder has arrived, so with that installed and some bleeding, we'll have brakes. Cat. There's always a cat. It's the next day and we're realizing things. Thing 1, trying to reuse the gasket on this housing was absolutely stupid, and I knew that, but I did it anyway, you know, to try and finish something for the last video. It's actually leaking even though we haven't put fluid in the dang thing yet. That's just fluid slowly leaking out of this housing, and it's coming right through there. So this is going to need to come back out and get resealed, and that's fine. These axle shafts probably need to come out again anyway. And we still need to finish the brakes. I actually do have correct e-brake levers and crossbars on the way now. We kind of cobbled something together out of van parts and 9-inch brake e-brake levers, but it would have taken more modifications to get them to actually function, and it's not worth the trouble. Thankfully, a friend Mike saw in the video that I needed this stuff, and he put it in a box and sent it my way. So we'll have that in a couple days too. I'm very pleased with the way the front end has come together. Lots more to do, of course, but we're really getting places. We've currently got the Z-bar hanging in place. I got this from my friend Mitchell with some other various pieces, like the flywheel we're going to be using in this car. It's actually a correct early A-body Z-bar that has not been broken and welded back together multiple times. It came with the fender well bracket, which is bolted in place, and it came with the bell housing side as well, which I think will fit on our scatter shield. Or at least it will once I cut off this later A bracket, which for some reason is welded here. It's Wednesday, August something. There's a test and tune in Bremerton on Friday, and I was kind of sort of dreaming of making it to that with this car. It seems very unlikely at this point because we still have countless systems to finish. We don't have an electrical system at all yet. We don't have seats. We don't have the auxiliary gauges. We don't have an engine. We could have an engine soon, except we still don't have cylinder heads. Those are at Johnson Machine. Dan the headman was on vacation when I dropped him off last week. He's back now, and at this point they're pretty much done, but he's waiting on a few fresh parts. Even if we're not going to make the event on Friday, I want this car together as soon as possible. Like, now would be great. That way, if there are any other test and tune type events in the near future, well, maybe we can go to those. And even if not, we've got some nice weather right now, and I'd love to be doing some testing out in the street. Allegedly. So I'm thinking what we're probably going to do is drop this engine in as a short block. That way we can build the rest of the combination around it. And when the heads get here, we can drop them on in place, bolt the tunnel ram on, and have a party. Either way, before this engine goes in, I need to do a couple things. Here's the first. I was planning to run some solid 273 lifters on this hydraulic Mopar purple shaft cam. I still think that's a fine idea, but I have decided using used ones, probably not a great idea. I wanted to have these refaced. I figured I could get this engine together quickly and just sort of skip that step, but I really don't want to ruin this thing. So I'm going to take these out. They're going to go to Oregon cams for grinding. And what I'm going to do for this engine instead is just install the NOS Mopar lifters that I have. They are hydraulic, but of course we've got adjustable arms. We'll be able to take all of the preload out of them, and that should prevent any valve floating issues, which is my real concern here. I suppose they could still collapse. Hopefully they won't. And that's all well and good, but apparently I only have 15 of these things. Oh, you dirty rat. Slightly covered in cobwebs, but better than not having it at all. Now there is another issue swapping between these, which you'll quickly be able to notice here. The pushrod cup for the solid lifter is way further down compared to the hydraulic one. And that means we could well have a pushrod length issue. Now, if this was squished down to roughly the middle of its travel, well, they'd be a lot closer. But we want this thing to be at 0 lash, 0 preload, which means it needs to be in this location. I sure would have liked to save these new old stock Mopar performance lifters for future builds. As we must all be aware of by now, modern lifters kind of suck. The machining of these lifter faces that ride on the cam lobes, well, that tends to be not the greatest these days, and so hanging on to new old stock ones like this, that's a good move. There are only so many of these left in the world. But I also don't want to risk damaging my new old stock Mopar Performance purple shaft cam, so I think using these is going to be the right choice. Hold the phone, stop the presses. These are not NOS lifters. Or at least some of them aren't. Obviously, you can see there's circle patterns on most of them. There are little dings and scratches and maybe even a rust pit here or there. Okay, fine. But this guy has a straight across pattern. See that? And the only way you're going to get that is by running this on a cam and having this lifter stop spinning. So I don't have NOS purple shaft lifters either. Very interesting. It looks new here and it hasn't been pumped up, but maybe it was taken apart and cleaned. I don't know, but that pattern is not good. I mean, you can see the dip across there. That is clear, 100% sure evidence that this thing has run and it didn't spin right. I could swear I had one other set of NOS small block lifters, but you know what? If they're in this pile, I don't think I want them anymore. So we don't have heads yet, and we don't have lifters at all. Obviously, I'm going to have to figure some things out here, but I'm going to go ahead and continue with this. I've got the heads for my 318 set on there just to mask everything. I put some plastic up in the valley, and I plugged the distributor hole. Now I'm going to hit this thing with some glorious red paint and make myself feel better about today, I guess. Well, this paint kind of sucks. It's almost as bad as my almost non-existent prep job, but anyway, it's painted red. We've got a brake master cylinder. It's bled and installed and everything. It's not attached to a pedal yet, but we'll get there. We're gonna be passing the line out of the bottom of this thing. We've still gotta reroute this and get it kind of around the steering and the Z-bar and everything to get to that point. Meanwhile, Alan's getting all excited about like a photo op or something, and we're putting the grill and headlights back in finally. Alan's off buying a brake fitting. I'm handling small engine details because with any luck, we'll be putting this in with the 4-speed soon, I guess. First one, this front pulley. Oh, that's very much not period correct. The good thing is no one will ever see it there. This is an aluminum pulley. It came on this fancy fluid damper thing. Note it's a little shallower than the one you'd expect to see on here, and I believe that's because this balancer is so much thicker than it ought to be. I did have to file the inside of it a little bit because it's like damaged in there on the balancer. Those two pieces locked together with that machine surface, that's what centers the pulley. Anyway, it's on there now, and so are the obnoxious Allen head bolts. Fuel pump walk-off plate. That thing will probably leak. They pretty much always do. We're going to run an electric pump in the back of this car, you know, because race car. So we don't need this. Chrome dipstick and tube, which I hate, but oh well. We've got these neat little shiny bits that all kind of match each other, so it could be worse. Now, hopefully this stick won't disintegrate and leave little flakes of material inside the oil pan like the one in the Demon did. Yeah, thank you. We've got a master cylinder, and it's plumbed, and it's full of fluid, and now we're gonna bleed the brakes. And then maybe one thing on this car will actually be done, except of course that we still have to gut the rear again. I sure can see a lot of daylight through this floor. Anyway, we're up on the lift now, and I'm sitting in here on a seat on the ground. We're gonna bleed some brakes the old-fashioned way. I have a tiny bit of drag in the pedals so far, but not really brakes at this point. It's a little while later, and Alan has done a couple laps getting the brakes bled. Currently, we've got this. If I just hit the pedal, it goes halfway down. If I release it, bump it, it's tight. Now, you might think that's air trapped in the system, and it could be, but we're not seeing any more air. What's more likely here is because we've got the shoes intentionally set loose, well, all of that is travel in the brakes. And then when you pump it like that, you're putting more fluid on the back side of the wheel cylinders, forcing them out and tightening the pedal. When you release, you can hear the sounds of all the shoes returning. So we're going to tighten the adjustments a little bit. Again, we want no rolling resistance here. That's the idea, but a firmish pedal would be nice too. I've had a bit of air trapped in one of the Demon brakes for a very long time, and so the pedal in that car is like exactly like this. It's fully ignorable, to be honest. Check it out. The 500 wheel is back. This is the same wheel that's been on the car forever and ever and ever, but Alan got all the spray paint off it. Of course, somebody sanded to try and get the paint to stick, which didn't work, but anyway, it looks better. I'm happy with that. So now we've got two controls that do something. We've got a brake pedal that mostly works, and a steering wheel attached to stuff. Aside from replacing this one tie rod boot, we've done absolutely nothing with the steering system on this car. It's remarkably tight. Usually these idler arms are worn out, but this one's been replaced at some point, and so far so good. Pitman arm's okay. Hardware is, I think it's tight. And the box is pretty good. There is some play in it, but, well, there always will be. We're monkeying with steering, trying to center the wheel. It's really convenient to have this hole here to look at it through. Anyway, I actually popped the wheel and its adapter back off. The master spline is usually facing straight up, the one behind the steering wheel. It was facing this way, so the wheel was off by 90 degrees. That was part of the reason we couldn't get the wheel to center right. Then I messed with it and realized the master spline facing up put the box off center like quite a bit. Or so I thought. What I actually think is happening here is there's something wrong with our pitman or idler, and it's really easy to see if you eyeball the torsion bars. Look how close that inner tie rod is to the driver's side bar, and then compare that to how far this inner tie rod is from the passenger bar. It's a lot. When you know that, well, it's really easy to spot this linkage being totally out of whack. Now, I wouldn't be too concerned about that, except I think I've already mentioned that we need the tie rod angles to match the lower control arm angles. That's how you keep your steering from doing wacky things as the suspension droops out. This is a trick referenced in the Direct Connection Racing Manual. It's the way I align the Demon. Basically, you match the tie rod heights side for side, and you do try to match that angle, and then you set the camber. And by doing that, you ensure that these are set the same. Well, the angles are not going to be the same with our entire linkage kicked this way. I don't know what I'm going to do to fix that just yet, but we're going to have to figure something out. Oh, if you know early A-bodies, then you know this is still a slant 6 crossbar. I was going to replace this with a V8 one I got, but, well, someone else needed that more than me, so I don't have it anymore. All you have to do to clear the slant 6 bar with your V8 oil pan is just bash it with a wood block and a hammer in kind of this area. Sure wish I'd done that before I painted it. Oh, anyway, the 273 has engine mounts now. Very nice. I actually cleaned them and painted them. I don't remember where these brackets came from. Probably also Mitchell. I've got a set of solid motor mounts on there. Now, I've been told by certain uncles, Tony, that having solid mounts on ears like this is a recipe for breaking the block. And obviously we don't want that. But the Demon here has been on solid mounts for years and that block's still in one piece, so I think it's probably fine. Other than figuring out some slight bolt issues, this is a mile long. This is too short for that location. I haven't been able to find the perfect bolt, which is like 4.5 inches long. And these two are only catching like 2 threads in there. Ignoring all of that, this thing's basically ready to go. Or it's ready to come off of the stand anyway, so we can do clutch stuff. All I need to do now is find a pilot bushing, and I swear there are like 5 of them in this pile. But I'm not having any luck with that. Allan's repairing our scatter shield. A couple small problems here. First, the pivot welded on. All right, well, I'll take 3 hits. We'll clean that up a little bit, and then the correct early A one will bolt right on there. The other big issue is this. This is one of the 4 bolts that holds the transmission to the scatter shield, and that is the broken off end of an original. Something weird happened here. It's like welded in place and then cut off and ground smooth on the other side, and they drilled this new hole alongside it, like part way into the bolt. I think what we're going to do is try and cut this weld and then spin that out or drill it out, or I don't even know what, and then we'll probably just weld a nut on the back side here. There's plenty of room there. This is huge compared to like a stock bell housing that curves in here. The clutch is going to be all the way up here, and a nut welded there won't ever be in the way of anything. I do not understand why this was ever welded. Doesn't look like the bolt holes are stripped out. They're full of gunk, but they're still there. Don't mind me, just digging my engine for a walk. We're using the cranny dangly thing again. It's been a while. Anyway, the 273 is precariously hanging from it. I'm now going to get the engine stand off, and we can deal with stuff at the back of the engine. Did I put the car all the way in the air with the tool that I needed still in it? I don't know. Would I tell you if I did? Allan's so good at stuff. That's impressive. Now that I've got the engine dangling here, it's time for some bad news. This is a pilot bushing. Normally, I don't even use these. I use the pilot bearings you can get that fit the Ram and Dakota applications from the 90s. Generally, they knock right into this space, and it's a way better solution than the old school bushing. Unfortunately, this is an early crank. Before 1968, I believe, small block cranks had this smaller register here. This opening is used for the pilot section of the torque converter. On an early 904, it's a smaller pilot that goes in here. Later transmissions have the same bigger ones as the 727s, and for that reason, this is enlarged. Because of this, I can't use that fancy Ram pilot bearing. Now, what I could do is chuck the spacer thingy it mounts in up in a lathe and turn it down to fit this. And I might, but anyway, I figured I'd just use a bushing for this thing. I finally found one of these sitting around the shop after looking for a really long time. I know I have a bunch of these. It doesn't fit. I've always heard that some of these cranks are not finished to the right diameter if it wasn't for a stick application. I've never yet run into this, but here we are. You can see this actually has a little like edge lip in there. The measurement isn't very far off of what we need to get a press with this bushing. It's just a little bit too small. So I'm going to try and clean this up, and then I'm going to put a nice taper on this, and we'll see if maybe we can make it work. Yeah, it's called machining. All right, it's in there. I cleaned up in that thing with a sanding roll for a bit. Lightly sanded that end of the bushing, greased it, and drove it home. Kind of went with no drama, so hopefully we're good. I think we're good. We are not, in fact, good. This is my clutch pilot tool, which is actually an old crappy input shaft from a 23 spline transmission. And it will not fit in here. It did fit in this bushing before I installed it. What happened here is the softer bushing material compressed to fit inside the slightly undersized diameter, and now it's too tight for the pilot to go in. Great, so now I'm trying to fix that. It should be 3/4 of an inch inner diameter. I don't have anything to make it be that. Grinding stone works really well on that, but the only one I have is a taper that's too big to actually get in here, so now I've just massively oversized this end of it. I think a hone for brake cylinders would work pretty well, but I don't have one of those either for some reason. You'd think I'd have a Dremel kit around here with a sanding roll or something. But no, anyway, I don't know what I'm gonna do for this. It's getting kind of late though. I realized something. And that something is that I'm bored of not seeing this engine in that engine compartment. It won't be the final install, obviously, but it's really easy to just plop it in there. So I'm gonna do that for my own satisfaction. This overhead lift crane thing is rated for 500 pounds. I can tell you it'll lift a bit more than that, but it will not lift a complete Cummins engine. I've been dreaming of installing engines this way for a long time. It works pretty well. It won't work so well with a transmission on the back because I'm all the way at the end of the lift, and that's where we're at, so we wouldn't be able to angle that in. I actually do have a good reason for doing this. I need to know where on the oil pan I need to beat. So, yeah, it's not just for fun. Too far. Sketchy! Yeah. Did you know V8s are a tight fit in an early A body? Ooh, good. What was the oil filter after? Steady. Steady on. Whee! One. Oh, God. Come on. Go in your home. There we go. Oh, yeah. You know I had to do that. You know what's amazing? That whole tunnel ram setup almost would have fit under the hood. Really thought that would be taller. The old Edelbrock TR5 I had, that thing would have stuck him up another inch or two. Yeah, this is pretty much going to be the view behind the wheel, and it's pretty great. Red was the right choice. Gaze in wonderment at the engine in the engine hole. It's not quite level. We'll deal with that later. I did get a mark here for where the steering sits. Of course, this does go forward as it's steered left or right, so I'm going to come up, well, maybe to the end of this dimple, actually. I made one mark, but whatever. I'll take a wood block and a hammer and just beat this area senseless, and that should do the trick. That is exactly what I did for the oil pan on the 360 I put in this car like 12 years ago. And it worked great, although at full lock, the little whoopties here did hit the pan. I sure am liking all the color coordination. We're gonna have to paint the rear drums red now. Well, I can only stare at it for so long. We've been jamming on this thing for 3 days straight, and it's come a long way. It has brakes, it has suspension, it has tires, it almost has a drivetrain, but there's so much more left to do. We'll pick this back up tomorrow. It's the next day, and I'm going on a supply run. In style, obviously. Cat. Well, here's how I solved the problem. A 3/4 inch drill bit, and then a small sanding roll that actually fit inside there. And now the pilot shaft fits, which is fantastic news. We can actually put this drivetrain together now. I know what you're thinking though. You're thinking, Jamie, how can you confirm that that hole is perfectly centered and concentric? Oh, easy answer. I can't. Hopefully it's good enough. It's a little while later, the engine is out, and I have now beaten this oil pan savagely. Interestingly, I hit something here. I think it must be the top of the oil pump. Now, those little dimples would be the heads of the bolts on the oil pump. I measured, and they are at 5 inches from the oil pan rail, which seems really far down. I went over to my spare 318 and measured that. The top of the oil pump is at like 4.5 inches, but this is a high volume pump, so maybe it's a ½ inch taller. I've checked all kinds of things. There's no way windage tray, rods, anything important would ever be that far down. So we're gonna say it's fine, and hopefully this is enough dimple because obviously I can't dimple it anymore. I'm still grappling with how best to install this drivetrain. I think I'm gonna try and do engine, clutch assembly, obviously, bell housing, scatter shield, whatever it's called, all together, and then stab the transmission in after. If that doesn't work, I might just have to clearance crap until it does, because we may well need to be able to drop this transmission out in the future for clutch changes and such. However I'm gonna do it, I need to get the flywheel and clutch stuff on, so I dug out some bolts. I actually have a set of brand new pressure plate and flywheel bolts, so I guess I'm gonna use those for this build. I have tons and tons of flex plate bolts, but they're not long enough to go through a flywheel. They're usually like here. Flywheel is installed. I think I mentioned in the last video, this is the one that was previously in the Demon. This is another part that came from Mitchell, his collection of extra Barracuda junk. It did have a balancing weight on it, which I've removed. And you can see this had the standard 10.5-inch outside diameter clutch. We're going to be putting the slightly larger 10.95-inch ram clutch on here. They basically figured out how to use up every bit of space available on this flywheel, so it goes right out to the shoulder of the bolts. One little issue with that, you can see the surface difference between these two areas. The good news is there really isn't much wear here. There's no lip or anything. There's some little rust pits and things and some mild heat checking, but it's not too bad. I did hand sand this and obviously it looks terrible, but honestly, I think it's pretty good. Time to install our beautiful used clutch, which actually isn't all that beautiful, but I don't care. It's going in anyway. I did clean it up some, not that you can necessarily tell. And I scuffed the pressure plate as well. There was just a little light rust on here. A commenter on the last video on this car brought something to my attention, and I'm glad they did, because I don't know that I would have noticed this. You see, because this is an oversized clutch, it's 10.95 inches, and it's designed to fit in place of the factory 10.5-inch clutch, it comes way out close to the bolts that hold this thing down. Now, these bolts that I have are proper pressure plate bolts, and they have the special shoulder thingy on them. If you were to do this with just generic bolts that had a bigger hex head, well, that might actually hit the disc in here. And beyond that, these lock washers, which were included with these bolts, would totally be like right in the danger zone. Yep, it's a clutch, and it's pink, and it's centered, I think. This thing's kind of crusty, but yeah. Doing final prep on the scatter shield now before I can install this on the engine. I'm gonna have to find bolts for this. Whatever. Anyway, I got that nut welded in place. It's just kind of tacked on 3 sides. I'm sure that'll be sufficient. Now, the clutch fork pivot. This is the one that came in this scatter shield, and it's pretty obviously wrong. With this fork put in place, which I'm pretty sure is the right unit, it's way too far that way. This is another small block V8 bell housing, and as you can see, the fork pivot for that is extended and kind of angled down somewhat. I'm pretty sure that's exactly what we need. Here's the fork set in place. As you can see, those teeth, tangs, the pokey bits, they're pretty much right in the middle of the hole. Allan's back, and he's doing the strong guy stuff, namely holding the scatter shield in place while I start bolts. Yeah, there you go. Nice. Now, we don't have a block saver, which is kind of unfortunate. Obviously, we're hoping to avoid clutch explosions here, but you just never know. It's a good thing this is already red. I would have liked to have repainted it, but I'm currently out of the Chrysler red, and I'm really tired of it not being in the car, so yeah. Scatter shield is bolted. I used generic hardware for this. You've got your 5 3/8 bolts around the top there. Automatics only have 4, but the blocks and manual bell housings always have the spot at the top in the middle for number 5, so I did all 5. These are 3/8 coarse thread, 1 inch long with flat washers, obviously. Then you've got the 2 bigger bolts which come through this way from the block. Now, obviously, unlike a factory bell housing, these are not threaded, so we had to put nuts on the back side. These are 7/16 by 1.25 inches, maybe? Something like that. The starter is going to be the same situation. There are no nuts here for the fasteners for that, so we'll use nuts and bolts. I've only just realized I don't have a starter for this car. Look at this guy. You know, when we started working back here, this was a huge mess of like leftover slant 6 junk and abandoned transmissions and things. And now you can actually get around the car, which is pretty nice. Now, of course, the later mini starters are significantly lighter, but I don't have any of those on hand. I used the last new one I had in a box on the turbo car. I found this nice looking old starter. No idea where it came from, but it works as well as it looks, so I guess we're gonna run that. Well, maybe I won't be using this one because the gear does not return by itself. Perhaps this crappy one in the corner. This one works, but it makes horrible rattling noises and it smells like fire, so I think that's out. Allan's gonna run and get a starter, but before he does, we're just gonna drop this in for the, let's say last time, but definitely not the last time. Because of the style of header we're using, I'm pretty sure getting a starter in there later will be no problem. Kind of amazing. Clutch can to crank pulley, we've got like 3/8 of an inch to go past the rad support. Obviously we've moved forward now and the water pump's kind of over it, but anyway, it works. All right, so new issue. I should have beat the firewall tunnel area a little bit more just to aid in installation because we're currently on it. And the section of the scatter shield that's supposed to be attached to a block guard is catching the steering center link. Now, it was really, really bad until Allan went and steered the wheel all the way to the right. Now it's like kind of, sort of gonna fit, I think. Might have to just pry it a little bit. Note, if we had the deeper V8 link, this wouldn't have ever been a problem. Ended up taking it back out. This corner of the oil pan was catching the K-frame really bad. And the ears for the block saver, which we don't have, were in the firewall. Also with the whole steering clearance thing, the top of the scatter shield was hitting here. So we pulled it back out. We beat all of the things with a sledgehammer. The firewall this way, the tunnel this way, the pinch weld a little bit more, the corners, and then the oil pan as well. Maybe it'll work now. Maybe we'll do this a few times. That still almost didn't work, but Allan found the magic wiggle. Lord help us when we have to take this out the next time, which will probably be in like 20 minutes. One slightly mangled firewall later, it is in. And I don't know if you can tell, but it's actually angled way down at the back right now. You can see all of those bell housing bolts around, or you would be able to from underneath anyway. And that's good. That means we're going to be able to slide the transmission in and then swing it up where it goes. Going up. Oh, kind of. Going up. Getting excited. Oh, I did install a throwout bearing on the clutch fork. This is actually the one that was in the car before. It's like the one remaining piece of the drivetrain, I think. Well, I had it all the way in there and then had to drop it back down because I forgot to put the bits of linkage vertical. Second time's the charm. I don't know how he did it, but Allan just like wiggled it home. Well, it's in there. I should have done a little bit more grinding and beating because the transmission's still just touching the tunnel, and I don't know if we're going to be able to live with that, but yeah. Oh, also the repaired bolt hole, the threads aren't happy, so I need to chase those out. We actually ended up with quite a bit of steering clearance here, so that's good. We'll see when it goes full left how much in the pan this is. I predict a lot. You can't make this up. I dropped the jack out, I finished that last clip, and my phone rang. The cylinder heads are ready, which is great. That's great, but like, why couldn't they have had them ready a half hour ago? Anyway, I guess someone's gonna have to drive to Olympia now. Sit rep. I was thinking about driving my B-body up to get the cylinder heads, but I guess Allan's gonna drive his B-body up to get the cylinder heads. You know, he might have taken the neon, but I think we found that noise. Transmission's coming back out. Obviously with this thing up on the lift and a jack and nothing finished around the transmission just yet, it's not really a big deal. And the nice thing about this is I can get this process nailed now. I can make sure everything fits right, and then it'll be serviceable in the future. That's really important because what do you think the chances are I built the perfect transmission that's gonna last for 20 years here? I don't even know if this 273 is gonna make enough horsepower to achieve my goals. We might be ripping this thing out next year. You just never know. And so this is my chance to try and make all the pieces fit together nicely and come apart nicely. Okay, it's a little while later and the transmission actually fits just. And I mean, yeah, I think you could stack up a couple hairs to sneak through there, but that's about it. It's a real tight fit. Again, we've got solid engine mounts, and so this thing should not be dancing around much. If it shifts side to side and touches the cross member just a bit on a hard launch, well, it is what it is. I dug around in my crap collection for a while, and I found everything to put a clutch linkage together. The top rod from the pedal to the Z-bar was here. This, I believe, came from Mitchell. Have I said thank you to Mitchell for basically sponsoring this project yet? I don't know. Anyway, this is a factory early AZ bar. I did get this thing attached to this scatter shield, but I see the bar is at a bit of a down angle. To be honest, these are almost never right. They're always at some goofy angle, so I don't know if it works. It works. I don't know if this is the right fork, but it is pretty much right in line with the Z-bar. I think this is a spare clutch push rod from the Demon collection. The clips came from Dale's collection. This is just random. There's supposed to be a little disc thing that like centers in here, and it should have a piece of rubber, and I just used a washer and a grommet. Anyway, let's see what the clutch pedal does. Okay. It's not as heavy as I was expecting. It's a clutch, kind of. Rad. We just need a pedal over here. These ram clutches are often very difficult to press. I'm sitting on a random Ford Econoline bucket on the ground, and I can press it. It's not great, but I don't know, it's not as heavy as the old Demon clutch was. I'm gonna have to mess with this adjustment. I reinstalled the shifter, which means I can now do this. Oh, this is gonna be sick. Obviously, the beauty of the Vertigate shifter is it eliminates that terrible 2 to 3 thing. I've obviously missed third many times, on camera, so if you've been following my videos, you know that. But it's more than that. The action of this thing is like effortless. It takes nothing to shift gears. Of course, that's because I rebuilt it and lubricated everything. Sorry, I'm kind of just sitting here in awe now. This is very exciting. It's exactly what I wanted for this car, and it's in there, and it works. Great moment. Allan brought a mini starter from home. I don't know if this is the one out of the turbo car or the one that was in the van, but anyway, it's going in now. Look how close to the steering this is. I think we just figured out which steering component's damaged. Anyway, we'll get to that later. I just wanted to show you this because I've heard many times of people putting in these starters and bolting them down and everything seems like it's fine, but it won't engage properly. Either it won't engage at all or the teeth stick or something like that. And I've had this happen to me a couple times too. This scatter shield happens to have a hole that we can see in, so I can show you exactly what happens. Okay, I've got it in the right position right now. This thing is piloted in its hole and that's all great. Here's what you'll see sometimes. The pilot is not in the hole here. It's off at an angle. But if you look at the side here, it looks like it's installed correctly. See that? You could tighten the bolts down and you would think everything is fine, but everything is not fine. This is a lot harder to do with the old style starters because the snout is so long. But with these, it's actually pretty easy. Again, it's something I've seen myself a couple times and I've heard about it many more. You got to make sure when you're installing it, it goes right straight into the pilot hole here. If this happens to you or you suspect this is your issue, loosen your 2 starter bolts, pull the starter out slightly, kick it toward the block, and stab it back in and make sure it sits nicely in there. The prodigal Allan has returned from the faraway land of Tumwater, Washington with our 273 heads in tow. Look at these things now. They are beautiful and clean, and one of them's cracked. Apparently this engine or head got dumped on something somehow, and this ended up cracking here. Now, you couldn't see it from the backside, and this is just in the crankcase. It's above water, but it's like a ½ inch away from it, so I wasn't worried about this at all, but Dan over there actually grooved it out, pinned the end, and then filled it with epoxy, and that repair looks great. Like every other cylinder head job ever, this thing really snowballed. It ended up getting exhaust valve seats because these heads, as you may know, came out of a junkyard and they're totally rusty garbage. Even after a healthy decking, there's a bit of ghosting from previous rust pitting. And yeah, the seats were just terrible, full of holes. So we had to do exhaust valve seats on these. He did a nice valve job. He did smooth the seat transition out because that's something that really annoys me. He did a better back face on the intake valves than I had done, and set them up with new springs because I forgot to take my springs, new retainers because I forgot to take them retainers, and obviously new seals. The guides were apparently passable, which is good. I love passable. Anyway, let's make them red. Yep, they're red. Wow, this guy's tall enough to like drive from this position. You pull the T. You gotta put it in the middle. Put it in the middle. It's a very short throw. That's the middle. Now give it, nope. Now pull it, but give it a wiggle. No, more, no, there. You almost had it. There's a lot of important stuff to be doing right now. Cleaning up valve covers, probably not at the top of the list, but we do need to get the engine together and it's gotta have the MTs. Otherwise, what's the point? These are the ones that came off of that yard sale 318. You can see I'm kind of cleaning them up in the sandblaster. This one's looking pretty good. This one got a quick hand scuff and it still looks like garbage, but we're getting places. These, of course, will get the fins and the lettering sanded down to shiny after I hit them with some semi-flat black. That is the way, if you ask me. I was being very careful to keep the sand out of the inside till I flipped this thing over and just dumped a bunch in it. Anyway, looks pretty good. Pretty good enough, I'd say. Oh, this is a good time to find out this is cracked. Yeah, they're red. I could use another coat though. I missed some spots. So much has happened today. Test and tune tomorrow. Will we make it? No, we won't make it. But we might have a whole Barracuda. Or something approximating a whole Barracuda. It's the next day, and somewhere in this box of shredded chunks of paper, we should find the last important piece of the puzzle to put this 273 together. I hate this already. Well, I dug some lifters out of that box, and it's kind of a good news, bad news thing. See, I ordered 2 sets of lifters. I wasn't totally sure which way I wanted to go with this build. I was strongly considering sticking with the solid lifters. Even though we're running on a hydraulic cam, apparently for racing it's kind of fine. Now, I ordered these from Oregon Cam Grinders. Ken over there is a great guy, super knowledgeable. He got me these in a day, which is fantastic. Unfortunately, this box, which he had just received, only has 12 lifters in it, and I kind of need 16. It looks like someone at some point knew that, because it's handwritten 12. Yeah, somebody missed the memo. So he's going to get me 4 more right away. The problem is, I wanted to put these in the engine like right now, and I guess we won't be doing that. Now you can ignore the box here. These are Johnson High Lift hydraulic lifters. Johnsons are made in America. I mean, most of the crappy ones are also made in America, but these are supposed to still be worth using. The machining looks, I don't know, like machining. What do I look like, an expert or something? We put a set of these from Oregon Cam Grinding in Mark's Barracuda engine, and it worked out great. So moving forward, if I am going to use hydraulics, I'm going to try and stick with these wherever I can. And this may be what we do today, but I'm kind of bummed. The lifter on the right is the 273 barbell style. This, of course, is solid. It has a cut machine into it there, and then it has this big area in the middle which will retain oil, but there's no feed hole into it or anything like that. It's the same type of lifter as I was going to use out of the 273 I took apart. On the left, of course, is the hydraulic. You can see the clip, the piston. These do appear to be oil-through lifters, which is pretty typical these days. If you have a hollow push rod, it'll be able to send oil up to your rocker. As I mentioned, the depth of the bucket where the lifter sits is slightly different. The body of the hydraulic lifter is slightly taller as well, and the cup sits higher in it. So, yeah, there will be like a 3/8 inch difference in our push rod length. I suppose what I'm going to do is get the cylinder heads bolted on the engine, and then we can drop a couple of these once they're cleaned up in there and see what the push rod length situation looks like. If I can make it work, okay, maybe we'll just run those. Our cylinder heads are looking pretty good this morning. I did hit them with a quick round of touch-up, and probably good enough for me. You may have noticed my masking techniques are basically non-existent. I use a set of old covers to keep big amounts of paint off of the springs and such, but that's pretty much it. I don't mind getting a little paint in the ports or a little bit around the spark plug threads. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. Once these are dry, I will flip them over and make sure there's no overspray on the deck surface, which needs to be cleaned before installation. Otherwise, yeah, it's just not worth the trouble. This head has exhaust studs in it. This one does not. Now, these holes are open to water. I want to make sure to get studs in those locations. All the other locations will have header bolts. The LA Chrysler, for whatever reason, uses 5/16 exhaust hardware, unlike just about everything else in the universe, which uses 3/8. I do have a few sets of these around, including these, which are chrome, I guess. Maybe we'll use those. Those fasteners will be attaching a set of fender well headers. I would say there are like 4 essential parts of this car that make it what it is. The tunnel ram, the fender well headers, the shifter, and the cowl-mounted tack. Now, these particular fender well headers look like absolute garbage. They were on the Barracuda when I got it way back in 2014 or whatever. Far as I know, they've been on there for a very long time. Now they've been sitting around rusting for 4 years, and they look like this. Also, there are like cobwebs everywhere. What we're going to do for now is knock the big chunks off these, blow them out with air, and that should be sufficient. Once the engine's broken in, I'm planning to pull these back off, clean them very thoroughly, maybe even take them to have them sandblasted, repair a couple really ugly spots, and then paint these things so they look halfway decent. If we paint them before the engine break-in, it'll last like 2 minutes. This high-temperature exhaust paint stuff can work very well if you bake the pieces correctly. But running them for 20 minutes at like 600 degrees is not what counts as correctly. So don't paint your headers and then break your engine in through them. You're not supposed to do that with coated headers either, actually. The main reason I went back to the old school pump and pray single pot master cylinder was to make room for these headers. You can see here this thing has been bashed and repaired multiple times over the years to make way for the later 67 and up dual pot master cylinder. I don't want that. I really want to repair this and get it looking good, but that's not going to happen today. I'll promise you that. For what I can only assume is no reason at all, there's a weird mark on the passenger side header that looks like someone took a Sawzall to it or something, but then gave up partway through. So there was an exhaust leak right here in the passenger side fender well the entire time this car was drivable. I'll be fixing this with a welder, although as Allan pointed out, it's not like you'll be able to hear it. See this neat melted spot on the number 1 primary tube? Well, there's a fun story for that. One night I pulled into O'Reilly, and allegedly when I slammed on the brakes, the battery slid rearward and rammed into this pipe. It melted a hole in the corner, battery acid went everywhere, and I can tell you, that's not a fun thing to inhale. That, combined with a couple other fun moments over the years, is why I insist on putting some kind of battery hold down on every vehicle. I've actually sent the battery into the fan twice in this truck. Alright, I said 4 essential pieces, but maybe it's 5. The finned MT valve covers are definitely an essential part of harkening back to a simpler time. And they're now clean enough to paint, so I'm gonna do that. There's the coat of the semi-flat finished. We'll let that dry for a while, and then we'll do the fun part. That fun part, of course, the most essential step to achieving the look we're going for, sanding the top of the fins. I talked about these heads a little bit when Allan brought them back last night, but I want to mention a couple more things. First, the machine shop bill, $970. Ouch. Cheaper than Edelbrock heads by a lot, and right for this 273 build, unlike Edelbrocks or AFRs or any aftermarket head you can get. These have the smaller valves to match our small bore and the smaller runners. This is the right way to go for this engine. I did not intend to spend almost $1,000 on them, though. They were junkyard fresh. I don't know what I was expecting. Someone else that has to be mentioned is a gentleman named Tim. Tim actually lives in California, and he found this 273 engine core in a junkyard down there. This is the engine these heads came from. The rest of it is still here, not looking very good. In any case, the price was right, and I do have to thank Tim again for that. We also have Tim to thank for a bunch of parts in and around the 4-speed. You see, a good friend of Tim's, who is no longer winning with us, unfortunately, was a land speed racer. He did this using Hudson products, but he put Chrysler transmissions behind the Hudson flathead engines, which is really interesting. This Vertigate shifter is a piece that he had used. There's also an adapter here that it's mounted on. Well, that came from him too. The linkage, the shift cover, the gaskets in this thing, and all kinds of small bits of hardware, well, they came from him. So again, thanks to Tim for this huge contribution to the car. Well, I guess it's finally time to drop the heads on. I cleaned the deck surfaces on the block, I cleaned the surfaces on the heads, and then I went and dug out these 318 head gaskets. Now, I discussed in a previous video, these are what I'd be using. My favorite choice would have been a factory 273 shim gasket with the small irregular shaped chamber. My least favorite would be the Felpro gasket because they are very thick and they have the biggest LA bore size. The gap there is humongous and the amount of compression lost is sizable. Now, these factory 318 gaskets from the late 60s, early 70s are a bit thinner than the Felpro and they have a smaller circle. It's still oversized quite a bit for the 273 as you can see there, but it's basically the best option we have available. What I should be doing here is calculating the compression ratio. I'm not going to, but I should be. I actually think it's going to be a good bit lower than I was anticipating. These engines with these pistons from the factory and this same cylinder head were rated for something like 10.5 to 1. I'm just going to put the head on and run the best fuel I can get, and it'll probably be fine. You know, that general "it'll probably be fine" vibe has gotten me pretty far in life. Your mileage may vary, but I don't know, I've always had really good luck just putting things together. Anyway, now I'm digging around in my 273 parts pile for head bolts, because I forgot about head bolts. Maybe we won't use this crusty one. The LA Mopar uses 10 bolts per head for a total of 20. Of those, 10 will be the little short ones, and we're missing 2 of those. Out of the long ones, 8 should be long, and 2 should be very long. These are the ones that go through the extra tall holes in the heads. There are passageways around these that go up to lubricate the top end. Yes, I am reusing a set of factory head bolts, which is now clean and complete. No, I am not at all worried about that. Sure, this is a race engine, but it's not that kind of race engine. It's not like we've got enough power here to set the world on fire. Now, when we're talking boost and double the horsepower, yeah, we'll get some ARP stuff. But for normal stock type builds, I've always reused the factory pieces, and I always will. And yes, I will be lightly lubricating these bolts with engine oil. A commenter on a video a few weeks back said, "Jamie, engine oil changes the torque spec on the bolt." Yes, it does. And because these specs are given with engine oil, I will be using it. Lubricants like ARP's lube, for example, do change the amount of torque it takes to reach the correct amount of tension for the bolt, so we won't be using that. We'll be really thorough and even get a little bit under the heads. Here I've got all the head bolts in place. Of course, the special long one goes right there. I spun all of the head bolts down flush by hand, mostly with a speed wrench, except where it wouldn't fit. I just used my fingers. All of these things spun into those holes perfectly because my machine shop does such a great job of cleaning all that stuff out for me. Well, except for that one time they didn't. And now I've got all the head bolts torqued in 3 even steps to their final spec of 85 pound-feet. For some reason, the 273s and 318s are 85 and the 340s and 360s are 95. No idea what that's about. Oh, also, ignore these scrapes over here on the driver's side head. Allegedly, somebody put a big fat run there. Back to work on the crown jewels. You know what I could have done? Filed this before I painted it, because then it would have been a quick sand job. Turns out, because this has never been done on these covers before, they needed a lot of work. The casting is not exactly perfect or straight or even very good. And there are some fins here you can see like a file isn't even touching yet. So I'm going to be here for a little bit, but it's all going to be worth it. I promise you that. Getting remarkably close to the finished product here. You can see just how not straight this was, but it's a big improvement. Most of the fins are getting shiny. Mostly. Need to clean up the letters. That'll have to be done by hand. But yeah, a little bit more cross sanding here. I'm having to do a lot more than I expected, and I kind of sort of got a couple fingerprints in this paint because it turns out it wasn't quite cured enough to handle like this. Oh, also rattle can paint tends to gum up sandpaper, so that kind of sucks too. Don't mind me just bouncing back and forth between all the things at once. This is a set of 273 push rods, actually slightly shorter than factory. These were the ones we were going to use on Mark's engine, but they ended up being too long for that. This is a set of 3/8 push rods I have labeled 340 new. So what I'm thinking is these were ordered for a 340 to be used with adjustable rockers, but I don't know if they're going to be the right length for what we're doing. I sure don't love the interface between these 3/8 push rods and the socket here, which is obviously for a 5/16. I put a little mark in there of marker. Whoop. Kind of sort of tried to spin this in there, and well, it contacts in places, but yeah, it doesn't engage the whole cup. They do fit perfectly in the dumbbell lifters, but because these are so short, I bet these push rods wouldn't even work with these. Anyway, now I'm testing valve train fitment. This is a set of factory 273 rockers that Allan cleaned up. These are those 3/8 push rods and 2 of the Johnson lifters. And as you can see, we're actually really close already. What we would be doing is setting these at 0 lash. And really, that wouldn't put these adjusters too far off where they would have been from the factory. Here's what that would look like. These are both set at 0 lash now. Of course, these are hydraulic lifters and they aren't pre-filled, so I can collapse them really easily. You got to try not to do that and just watch the movement of the push rod. When you've just got tension on it and there's no free movement, you are there. This gap looks good to me. I don't think we'd ever have to worry about cup to arm contact. Obviously, every one of these is going to be a little bit different, so we'd have to watch as we go, but I think we would be good. Now again, I'm not super excited about the fitment between the 3/8 push rod and the bucket in this lifter. If we end up bending push rods or spitting them out, popping lifters out of their bores, doing horrible things, well, that would probably be why. I've got these lifters all cleaned up. I checked them for crowns, which they do have. I'm gonna hit the faces with the Mopar camshaft lubricant, the sides with engine oil, and we'll drop them all in. The forbidden caramel. We've got lifters, we've got push rods, we've got lubricants on things. Rocker arms are on and I'm now starting to adjust them. Of course, I'll only be able to do a handful before I need to turn the engine. At the same time I'm turning the engine, I'd like to be pre-lubricating the thing, that is pumping oil through it with a drill and a priming shaft. And at certain points in the rotation, we'll get lubrication up to both rocker shafts. Before doing that, obviously some things need to happen. One of those things would be adding oil. Now the oil I'm going to use for break-in this time is non-detergent, straight 30 weight, and some of the fancy engine break-in oil additive from Lucas. Basically, we get the additive package we need for break-in out of this bottle, namely a whole bunch of ZDDP. And by using the non-detergent oil, the oil will not be fighting those additives and cleaning them off of surfaces immediately. My basic understanding of break-in oils is they're this. So that's what we're going to try this time. Drink up! Oh yeah. I suppose an oil filter could also be helpful in oiling. I went for the cheap one, just because I felt like it. Nice. Apparently I got the filter adapter clocked correctly. Look at all this room. Well, just wait till there's a header through here. The last thing we need to prime the oil system is an oil gauge. The oil gauge is going in a triple holder mounted to the cowl next to the cable drive tack. Before I can install and plumb the gauge, I gotta install the holder. To install the holder, well, it's gotta be mounted through the cowl. Currently, my arm is all the way up in there holding a nut while Alan tightens the bolt. That only works because the cowl is so rotten on this side. On the driver's side, it's not great, but it's not as bad, so I can't get my arm in there. Instead, we're gonna try and tape a nut to a wrench and fish that up in there for the far side bolt. And when that doesn't work, well, bad language will ensue, I'm sure. In case you were wondering how that's done, this oil gauge is installed. Line's tight on this end. There's our fitting in the block. And I think this is just gonna end up looped over here with our tack cable, kinda. Something like this. Maybe we'll end up with like a little bracket to hold these in place. And there we go. With that connected, we won't free-wheelie oil everywhere when I try to prime this engine. And yes, I've done that before. A couple times, in fact. One cool feature of the outside oil gauge, if it ever explodes and blasts oil everywhere, it won't be all over my knees. Another cool feature, I can prime this thing with the drill and watch the gauge. There it goes. Wow. 75 PSI immediately off the drill. That's a lot of PSIs. Now there is one issue, which Alan can demonstrate real quick here by turning the engine. We're gonna hear a fun noise. There you go. That is the noise of the starter teeth rubbing the teeth on the flywheel. Way back when we installed this engine in this car, Dale's Demon, we had exactly the same thing. The starter teeth were stuck engaged with the flywheel teeth. I solved that in a hurry by spacing the starter off with a couple washers, and I thought nothing of it as I continued to run it that way for a really long time. In fact, those washers might still be in there. I wasn't sure what the issue with that was at the time, but I know now. It's the spacing for the ring gear on this flywheel. It's kicked too far this way toward the starter. And it's a little late to do anything about that now, you know, what with being installed and everything. So I'm gonna do the same thing. I'll space our starter off with a washer on each bolt, and I'm sure that'll be fine. Probably for years. Alan turned the crank some random number of degrees, but it was the perfect number to line up the oil hole for the driver's side head, so we've already got oil there. I'm almost done with all of the adjustment on the driver's side. It's a little while later, and I've taken the passenger side valve rocker stuff back apart because we have a weird issue. I turned this thing over multiple times, and I never did see priming oil to the top end on the right side like I did on the left. A little bit more oil had come in here, but it wasn't running down back into the valley like over there. So I was curious. I pulled this bolt, and instantly there was pressurized oil right there because I have it lined up right where this side is lubricated. I even pulled other bolts, and there was oil there. So at this point, I'm slightly confused. I decided to take this assembly apart and see if there's oil going through the shaft to the individual arms. There is. Plenty of it, in fact. See those happy little streams? We've got 8 of them. Each rocker arm has an oil hole. I did look at some other assemblies and verify that they're supposed to be pointing this way, not this way, and that does seem to be correct. Alan cleaned these shafts up by hand. He didn't polish them or anything like that, but, you know, they're clean. And the arms move nicely on them, which tells me the clearances in here are acceptable. I just don't know why we're not seeing oil shoot out. The only thing I can think is maybe the number 4 cam bearing is cocked off to the side a little bit, causing less oil flow to come to this side. But again, there is oil present, so I don't know. I'm inclined to just move on and run it, but I just noticed something else really neat. I heard a mild popping noise up here at the front. I decided to double check my work, and I turned this push rod. It was loose. It had an actual gap. Then I realized I could push this rocker, and when I did that, it moved, and the valve popped up all the way. Why are those bound up together? How are those bound up together? Well, apparently, we have a retainer to rocker arm issue, which I never expected to see in a million years with these stock arms. But here we are. All right, here's the deal. It's Friday at 5 p.m. I am done touching this for now. I'm gonna have to pull those rockers off, grind every one of them for retainer and spring clearance, but I'm not doing any of that tonight. So what we're gonna do instead is move all of the garbage out of the way and roll this thing outside for some glorious, somewhat completed car pictures. All right, I hope you're ready for greatness, because I've got some for you. Bam. Look at it. Just take it all in. So much Mickey Thompson. You'll notice the valve covers are looking pretty fantastic now, thanks to Allan's handiwork. He actually sanded this more and then polished the fins up. They're not perfect. There's little bits of compound in places. There's still dust and that big fat fingerprint I put in there, but overall, minty. Tunnel ram, still not done. Carburetors, total junk. I don't even think I'm gonna use these. These are 600s. I'd really rather put 500s on here. And it just so happens we have 2 of those on the Banana, so yeah, I might be borrowing those. Oil pan under here, velocity stacks up here. What a look. Now, the stance is not where I want it. I really didn't want this massive muscle car rake, although admittedly it looks pretty great too. I want the nose like 2 inches higher and the back like 2 or 3 inches lower. I don't know if we're going to be able to accomplish that with these springs. In fact, I'm sure we aren't. The wheel openings are still the first rough cuts Allan did. We've done nothing to smooth these or pretty them up or weld the 2 panels together. Nothing. Honestly, you know, because race car, it's probably fine, but we will be improving this when the rear end comes back apart. How do you like these lines coming down together? I think that's neat. Every time I look at the Z-bar, it looks worse. The starter clearance issue still needs to be addressed. The steering's still bent, and many, many, many other things. So many things, I'm gonna stop thinking about it and just revel in this. Now remember, all of this questionable white paint is basically just a blank canvas. At some point, this thing will have some gold and red pinstriping. It'll have some Garbage Can Cuda lettering here on the door. And then, I don't know, window, quarter, maybe everywhere, we'll have vintage race stickers. Oh yeah. It's all coming together. We're definitely not going to talk about how crooked the nose of this car is. I'm starting to think it might have been in some sort of traumatic incident at some point in its life. All the better to race car with, am I right? Still don't have an accelerator pedal. So much more to do in here before we hit a racetrack. It's obscene. I did start building a reverse. I didn't, you know, finish starting. Found a set of the early A bucket seat tracks in California. They're on their way here. Brake parts to fix the goofy emergency brake stuff, also on the way here. We'll have this stuff soon. Maybe, just maybe, this car will be together next week. So at this point, although I won't be able to test this thing at my home track, I think I'm gonna have a working race car in time for the No Name Nationals. Multiple people have already tried to call me out with this car. Man, it hasn't even run yet, but I don't know, I guess I'll be your Huckleberry. Well, I guess that's it for now. This was an insane amount of progress for me for 1 week of work. This thing went from a pile of parts to almost a functional car. Almost. I certainly have to thank Allan for that, because without his help, this never would have happened. He did a lot of stuff on the car for sure, but he also kept pushing me to work on the Barracuda, to focus. And that's really what I need in life. Someone to make me focus on stuff. I'd kind of like to be working on Perky right now. Or doing 55 Imperial things. Or, you know, burnouts. Instead, we did this, and I am super pleased. We'll certainly have more updates on the car coming in the near future. Hopefully you'll stick around to watch that. Before long, we should hear glorious 273 noises, and then hopefully we can make some tire smoke. Until then, as ever, thank you very much for watching. And remember, do you want to build a race car? Now all we have to do is push it back in there. That'll be fun.